national conversations. Today we want to look at the question of driving non-energy exports. And we want to look at it from the point of view of a policy, of public policy. I'm your moderator, Anthony Gonzalez, and I'm pleased to discuss this subject with a number of very interesting persons. We have a very, we might call them a very star-studded cast, if you wish, very interesting persons. But before I introduce them, let me say that this topic is of fundamental importance. We have discussed some aspects of this on the chat before, and we can see, for example, where, the present government is also emphasizing this question with great importance. They're talking about looking beyond oil and gas and looking at some new areas like tourism and agro-processing and so forth. So it's a very essential topic in terms of how we go forward. And I had the good fortune some months ago, I think, of doing a presentation along these lines. So I'm very keen myself in hearing what contributions others have to make. It's a topic that has been with us for quite a while. And today now, as oil and gas prices go down, as well as oil and gas production go down, I think we are forced to consider really what are our alternatives. We are in a very competitive world, and we're in a very difficult world, a world which is becoming, in a sense, very protectionist. And we have to carefully look at what are our possibilities outside here. So as I said, I'm very pleased to welcome among us for this discussion, three very prominent persons. We have Dr. Ramesh Ramdeen, a good friend of mine. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association. He has been involved as well, I believe, in the past as a trade economist in the Ministry of Trade. I hope my memory serves me correct. Yeah. And I also know him as a lecturer at the university teaching international trade. So he's well-rounded, and I should mention the amount of trade delegations he leads outside in terms of promoting trade. I think he's eminently suitable to discuss this topic. We have also Mrs. Vashti Gayadeen. Vashti Gayadeen, of course, is also very well known. She's now the head of the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce. Before that, I hope I'm correct, I believe she was also head of the Trinidad and Tobago Coalition of Services. She has served in a number of portfolios. I have, in a sense, lost track of all the areas in which she has operated. I believe she was also in the public service for a while, where she gained some public sector experience. But she has served in a number of things. I remember as well, she was involved with, I think she's still involved with the Trinidad Ramphal Center as an advisor. And she also worked with the Women in Caribbean Trade. I have the good fortune of following these things as someone involved in trade. And as I read, I keep track of these persons. So welcome, Vashti. And we have finally Mr. Vivek Sharan, who is no stranger to us. He has been with us on a number of occasions. He is currently the chairman of Sharan Company Limited, and he runs Sharan Bookstore. He also is head of the Confederation of the Regional Chambers. We are quite familiar with him. He has spoken here a number of times, and he's also a public intellectual commenting on various public issues. So there's no need for me to spend more time introducing him. So welcome all, and thanks for participating. We hope this evening to follow the usual format, which is to say each speaker would have 15 minutes or less to make their presentation. And we would then follow that with some questions and answers. We are hoping that you would put some questions in the chat, and we will have some kind of discussion. Let me emphasize that we have just about an hour and a half, so I'm hoping that the speakers will stick to their time, and we would be able to come back to some kind of meaningful discussion. So let me get things going, and let me first of all call on Dr. Ramdin to make his presentation. Dr. Ramdin?
All right, Peter, are you hearing me? Can you guys see me?
Yeah, I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you, yes. I'm not seeing you, but just
I don't know what's
I
happening with
don't
my
know.
camera. For some reason, I have it on, but it's not, I don't know. I don't know
I'm
what's happening.
hearing,
But that's fine.
I'm
Once you
hearing,
can hear me, I guess we can try to make it work.
yeah, we can go ahead. Yeah, certainly,
All
yes.
right,
Yeah.
so I don't have no prepared presentation, Peter, but I will speak around the topic about the need for diversification and moving Trinidad along a trajectory that speak to diversifying and moving away from the energy sector. And we have to, and for all intents and purposes, we can't pussyfoot around this issue anymore. You know, for quite some time, years, I mean, since I used to work in the Ministry of Trade, we've been hearing this talk about diversification and the need to move away from our reliance on the energy sector. But the world today, the economy today, and the challenges we face in Trinidad and Tobago, it brings everything home. I mean, everything that we do, everything that we purchase in Trinidad and Tobago, we need foreign exchange. And the only way to get foreign exchange, Peter and Roger and everybody else, is either you rub Fort Knox or you export. You export goods, you export services. That's the only way you can earn foreign exchange, really and truly. I mean, apart from being involved in illegal activities, and we're not talking about that. So it's imperative that we move towards generating our own foreign exchange. We can't, in terms of us being Trinidadians, continue to depend on the energy sector to realize the revenues from the oil and gas, the earnings from the oil and gas, the foreign exchange earning capacity from the oil and gas. A number of factors account for that. One is we know that production has fallen significantly, both in oil and in gas. Secondly, prices have plummeted somewhat. You know, our budgeted prices, we know we're close to what our budgeted prices were. So we are at a stage where our revenues that we are getting from the energy sector is far below our expected budgeted amounts. That means in order for us to continue the lifestyle that we have grown accustomed to, that means that if we want to continue to buy the nice shirt that Peter have on, the nice glasses, the nice everything, our cars, our medication, everything, we need to earn foreign exchange. And why do we need foreign exchange apart from the obvious, which is to buy all those things that we need? Well, we have to pay our debts in foreign exchange. A lot of people don't realize that. You can't borrow money on the international market and then pay in TT dollars. So it's a priority call on the government to get foreign exchange to pay debts. Our vitamins, our tablets, our medication, things like paying credit cards, things like all these Microsoft license and all these different things that government have. All these different things with regards to manufacturing, we need to purchase raw material. Roger's asking a question. Should I answer the question one time or we take it at the end, Peter?
No, those questions are for after all the presenters talk.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I just put them there.
No problem, Roger. Thanks.
Yeah.
So we come back to the point that we need to generate foreign exchange. Now, I know that the manufacturing sector was once the champion in around 1986 when we were having that significant challenges with revenues from the energy sector, and the non-energy manufacturing sector was able to carry the economy. Today, to be honest with you, if we take the top 40, the top 100 manufacturers who are exporting, if they double their exports, if they probably quadruple their exports, we still can't fill that gap that we are lost in the energy sector. Let's be real about it. So the manufacturing sector needs to export, yes, but we need complementary sectors as well. The tourism sector, the ecotourism, the health tourism, the sport tourism, the services sector, the financial sector. We really and truly have to start thinking about seriously diversifying our economies. I want to reiterate, I think that point is a point that I don't want it to be lost on people. We can double, we could quadruple non-energy manufacturing exports. It just would not fill the gap that is being left at this point in time by the losses of the revenues that we would have otherwise gotten in the energy sector. But the manufacturing sector is also important for more than just generating foreign exchange. We can also change tastes, change consumption patterns, and encourage people to buy local. So you're spending more for the imports of products. Also, the manufacturing sector, once they're doing well, it generates employment. It creates less problems for the government to employ people. So there are a number of factors that goes into play in terms of ensuring that the non-energy manufacturing sector continue to do well, continue to grow. A lot of people might argue, well, why are resources allocated specifically for the non-energy manufacturing sector? I'm a firm believer, Peter and others, that once manufacturers reach a threshold of about 30% of their production, once you start to export about 30-35%, you become a net earner of foreign exchange. So what we need to do is to ensure that manufacturers get to that level. What we are doing at the TTMA to ready manufacturers to export their products, well, there are a number of things that we do. And Peter talked about leading all these trade missions all over the world, and we have done a significant amount. The chamber has done a number of them as well. And the importance of that is to get manufacturers outside here so they could start exporting the product. We just came back from a very successful trade mission from Guyana and Suriname. We actually met Roger in Guyana, where we took about 50 persons, 38 countries there. And the immediate returns that we can quantify coming out of that trade mission, well, initially it was about $3.5 million US, and as of today, we did some additional follow-up. It's about close to, I would say, $7 million US generated from that trade mission. And that's actual. In terms of potential, it could easily move to about $12-15 million in the short run. And I use in short run to mean in the next 6 months. Now, apart from those trade missions, what are some of the other things that we do in the TTMA to ready people to ensure that they could export and successfully export? Well, we have the TIC trade show that is around the corner, where we bring in over 200 buyers to Trinidad and Tobago from about 30 different countries. Manufacturers, so we're actually bringing the buyers to meet the manufacturers in Trinidad and Tobago. We are hosting inward missions. Apart from that, inward missions where we bring in buyers to meet manufacturers. We are ready in manufacturers in terms of their certification through frameworks that we have under the EBI, the certification fund. There's a grant, actually, a facility that we have there that allows manufacturers to access up to 500,000 TT dollars, where they can actually bring themselves, their products, their marketing, their whole certification process, whether it's HACCP, whether it's to meet standards to go into United States or North America, as the case may be, Puerto Rico in some instances. So all these things, all these bullets of the gun supposed to be working simultaneously to allow manufacturers to ready themselves to take advantage of the markets. The government have, over the last couple of years, have doing some work with regards to signing some partial scope agreement to create some market opportunities for manufacturers. My issue with some of those things is that let's fix some of the agreements that are not actually working optimally at this point in time. And Peter, you know, CARICOM have signed trade agreements with Costa Rica, with the Dominican Republic, and some of those agreements are not working optimally. We have the economic partnership agreement with Europe, where we still have some challenges in terms of doing some stuff and getting our goods inside there. Now, we are at fault to some extent as well, because Trinidad is not even a signatory to this agreement at this point in time. We haven't ratified. Sorry, let me say that over. We haven't ratified the agreement. We sign on to the agreement, but we haven't ratified the agreement. So we can't actually benefit from the full rubric of that agreement, the way it's supposed to work. Even CARICOM, I tell everybody that every time I have an audience like this, I always say CARICOM is the most uncommon common market there is in the world. You know, things like contingent rights and free circulation and all these different things. We're still not sure if we are free market, a common market, a single economy. I mean, these things are supposed to come in stream since 2008, and it was kicked down the road to 2012, and then it went to 2014. We talk about the free movement of people, and by 2012, we would have had everybody moving, and then we kick it down the road to 2014, 15. Today, we still nowhere better off. I mean, I qualify to move within the region probably under the established criteria. I think it's about 8 to 10 of them right now. I probably qualify under 3 or 4 of them. I like to consider myself a sportsman. At one point in time, I used to play a little bit of sports. I consider myself an academic, you know. So I supposed to qualify to move. Sometime when I go in some of these countries, not too long ago, I went into a country and someone asked me how long I'm here for, you know, and stamp my passport with a specific date, you know, and these things, we're still talking about, Peter, things like the contingent rights. Can I move? Can I go to Barbados and work? Can I carry my wife with me? Can my children get into school and all these different things? Issues about common law relationship and all these different things. Free circulation. Is free circulation allowed? Can I bring goods from extra regional sources into Trinidad and ship it to another island? No, I can't. I have to pay tax. So when you think about it, and we started the integration process around the same time with the European Union, around 1960s, thereabout. Look how far the European Union have moved in terms of deepening their process. They are at a stage where, they almost as a political union when you talk about the European Commission. We have the CARICOM Secretariat that I call a toothless bulldog, with all due respect, and I am not saying that the CARICOM Secretariat is at fault, but a lot of us within the Caribbean region continue to hold on to sovereignty of our little states. And that is stifling the growth of what CARICOM should really be. When you think about it, we have 15 CARICOM states, and we probably have about 9 currencies. Are we really serious about, where we're going with this, what we really want to do? There are a lot of discussion about how we move this process forward. We're talking about food security. We're talking about 25 by 25. But are we solving the issues to move to that particular direction? I mean, for example, there's no reason why manufacturers shouldn't be able to source all their raw material from Guyana, for example. But nobody talking about solving the issue that is stymieing the growth of that kind of trade, which is resolving the sanitary and phytosanitary issues. We still can't buy meat from certain countries and ship it to Trinidad. We can't even buy meat from Central America and Latin America and bring it to Trinidad because some 30, 40 years ago, there were foot and mouth disease and all these different things, but we could go there and buy a burger and eat it, It's really challenging in terms of the obstacles that are in place that stymie the growth of the manufacturing sector in Trinidad and Tobago. And when we look at things internally in terms of Trinidad and Tobago itself, there are challenges there as well, Peter. The ease of doing business, that is a big challenge. I always tell people as well, at the factory gate, Trinidad and Tobago manufacturers produce some of the best quality goods in the world, if not this part of the world, but at least the Caribbean and Latin America, Central America countries that are relatively cost efficient as well. The issue is that you could produce something at your factory gate for 5 cents, but all the inefficiencies in the system allows for that product, when it reaches on the shelf, it's being sold for 20 cents. So for example, crime. At one point in time, I did a survey with the Supermarket Association. 15, 20 years ago, it cost a supermarket between $10,000 and $15,000 for security. Today, that price on the average is about $60,000, $70,000. You have to have dog security, gun security. You have to have your workers. You have to have car taking them home. You have to have all kind of people coming to collect your money. It's a lot of different things happening there. The supermarket is not absorbing that cost. That is creating the price, the retail price to increase. So although the manufacturers producing at 5 cents, when it reaches the supermarket, it's being sold for 20 cents, and you're asking yourself why? Is the inefficiencies in the system. You could have moved, some people don't look at things like this, but 20 years ago, you could have moved 3-4 containers from Arima to the port. Today, with the traffic on the road, you probably could move 1 or 2 if you're lucky. That is inefficiencies. That is a cost to produce. Crime, let's not even get involved the discussion in crime. The border agencies. Today, Peter, I have issues with the port in Port of Spain not working optimally where we can't move goods. And the port is telling me, for example, they just have no room on the port to move the empty containers so full containers with raw material could come in. Those are challenges we have. Chemistry, food, and drug is continuing to be a nightmare in some instances. The Bureau of Standards, all the border agencies are not working optimally. Customs. I am not Nostradamus, Peter, but I could tell you, come September, October, November, the port workers are going to probably strike. And it's going to create havoc for us operating and clearing goods on the port. Because that is the time they know we will put pressure on the government to give them their piece of the pie. And those are the kind of inefficiencies that we continue to work with, the non-energy manufacturing sector continue to work with. But despite all that, Peter, I can say that the non-energy manufacturing sector, and I want to be specific with what I'm saying, the non-energy manufacturing sector, not non-manufacturing, the non-energy manufacturing sector, not right. So I want to be specific. I'm carving out a niche for the non-energy manufacturing sector. We have been doing well since COVID, and I can tell you that we have been growing in some sectors as much as double digit, like the food and beverage sector. And when the food and beverage sector doing well, printing and packaging also does well. But is that growth enough to replace the losses we're getting from the energy sector? No. I'll be the first to say, is it important to have that growth and try to push the envelope and get more SMG Lille, get more Blue Waters, get more associated brands, get more Angostura? Yes, we need to do that. But as I said, if you take the top 20 manufacturers, exporters, and double or quadruple their export, we still wouldn't be where we need to be in terms of filling the gap. So with that introduction, Peter, I know you give me a time limit. I spoke about 8-10 minutes. If you want me to go on more, I can go on more. But with that introduction, I turn it back over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ramesh. No, that's quite good. That was a pretty good overview of the situation. I think you've highlighted a number of issues there, which I think we need to take up in the discussion. Lots of them, I think, really touch on the question of how do you make us competitive in this area of manufacturing, and particularly in non-energy manufacturing. So certainly we are going to come back to them, but let me go on to the other speakers, and then we'll have at the end an overall discussion. So Ms. Gayadeen, yes, on to you next.
Sure. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah.
So Ramesh did an excellent job in terms of outlining all the obstacles and challenges that the business community has been facing for more than 2 to 3 decades. And we have little solutions to these issues. They continue to be around, stymieing growth of the new revenue streams that the Chamber has been projecting and talking about for quite some time. Back in 2007 to 2010, I worked at the Chamber as the head of research. And in 2008, the Chamber introduced something called a diversification roundtable. And we did our homework. We commissioned a study to look at potential export areas. And what we did, we put together a roundtable. We gathered key stakeholders, including private sector, academia, and government, and put forward a blueprint and presented it to government in about 2009. And the idea here was to get key parties together to drive 3 to 4 sectors that we felt could be new revenue streams for Trinidad and Tobago. And fast track to 2025, little has happened. And I also work at the Economic Development Board and the Council for Competitiveness. And tremendous work had started there in terms of the ease of doing business. We had dissected the pillars of the global competitiveness and the World Bank indicators to see what are the core areas we needed to focus on in terms of leapfrogging Trinidad and Tobago. So why am I stressing on these things? Because the work has been done and we do not need to reinvent the wheel. What we need, what Ramesh has spoke about, is that we need not just a whole of government approach, but we need a whole of country approach to drive diversification, to drive the creation of new revenue streams. And time is of the essence and we do not need to say that we're going to track 50 problems. Let's tackle in the short term, prioritize the areas that we need to focus on. At the Chamber, what we have been focusing on is looking at the core areas within the ease of doing business that is impacting on scaling business from small to medium, from medium to large. And working because roughly just under 70% of our membership are SMEs. And really and truly, we need to grow the micro to small, the small to medium. So what really we are working with these companies on a one-to-one basis and tracking that information to see how we can help them, what policies, because this session is supposed to be policy driven. What policies need to be put in place to drive these companies? What should the ecosystem look as? Now, Roger put forward a question in terms of the hyperong services. I spent roughly 6 years of my life trying to drive the growth of the services sector. It's not a hype. The fact about it is that we need to have a strategic focus on services. Why a strategic focus? Because services is intangible. We do not have reliable data on services. So to say that we know the data that we do have demonstrates that less than 10% of services are being exported. But the fact is that how we do not know how to measure, and it is not just a Trinidad and Tobago problem, it's not a CARICOM problem. It's a global problem in terms of how we measure services. So emphasis must be placed on modernizing the CSO, on looking at how we track services. And why is this important? Because we cannot get something, once you measure something, you can address the problems. There are subsectors within services that have been doing well. Professional services, knowledge-based services, marine services, yacht services. If we were to dissect the areas of tourism that we need to focus on, definitely yacht services. Back in 2000, yacht services down in Chagaramas was earning roughly with roughly 500 yachts coming into Trinidad for on average 6 months, because these yachties are long-term tourists. They come and they engage and they participate in the local economy. They buy local goods and services. These persons generated 56 million per annum. Again, fast track to 2016 to 2025, it's less than 6 million. So what must be done to enhance that yacht services? We know what has to be done, because we are outside of the hurricane belt, but we have made it very difficult for people to come into Trinidad and Tobago. We do not have a single harmonized form. The rest of the world have moved to Sail Clear, which is a digital platform, and we have more than 13 immigration forms, making it very difficult to come into the country. So these are some of the areas that we need to focus on. And what I say is that we need to have a strategic plan, an action plan, prioritize the areas that we need to focus on for the next 6 to 12 months that really could stimulate growth of the economy.
Okay, thank you very much, Vashti. Certainly, you have raised a number of issues there that we will come back to in a short while. I think certainly in services, you're very well placed to give us some insights into what's happening there. So we'll come back to a lot of this in a short while. Let me move on to Vivek. Vivek, could you, yes?
Hi, good evening, everyone. All protocols observed. I've really been listening intently to both what Vashti and Professor Ramdeep have been saying. And you know, they're absolutely right. But you know, I'm talking because I'm somebody that has been speaking on behalf of the SMEs for a long time. And really, what we need to do is we all agree, and we've been agreeing for a long time about the need to diversify. But the problem is that the speed to diversification in our country is so incredibly slow. And there's so much barriers to our diversification, particularly for SMEs. Now, I've traveled to Medellin, I've traveled to China. I'll use those two examples. When I've traveled to Medellin, I did that, you know, through the Colombian embassy, through Colombia Techs, ostensibly to look for uniform manufacturing there. But then I entered into you know, many different areas in terms of seeing the entire garment manufacturing system there, which is huge. And the thing is that it's all family businesses. It's all small and medium businesses that have all, and a couple that have grown to huge ones. I visited an area that looked like I was going into Laventille, only to realize it was a huge garment factory where they were making um, uniform for LATAM, which is a huge South American airline. And if you see the size of this factory, I mean, it boggles the mind how many people in there sewing and so on, right? I went to other areas where I saw many other small factories making everything, a lot of sportswear, a lot of jeans. Colombian jeans are a thing. A lot of tights, a lot of these quick dry t-shirts. Garment manufacturing there is huge. But what they have in common is one, they're able to access the technology, which is key. I mean, I've been a client of uniform manufacturers in Trinidad and Tobago, particularly over COVID. And we have many people who have specialties in sewing and stuff like that. And when I visit them, one of the things that, it bothers me is that they have the talent, they have the people working, but the technology is so far behind what I see out there. So I go to a place like Midget and they're doing the same thing there, and in very simple surroundings, they have a laser cutting device. I go to China, I see the same thing. When I look at what's happening in Trinidad, to me, it's so easy for SMEs to diversify. And one of the problems is, I mean, it's not a problem if you have 10 to 20 million TT dollars sitting somewhere. Then it's easy, right? Relatively easy. You should be able to set yourself up, you would think, but would you really? It is less than $1 million. You need less than $1 million in terms of if you convert that to US dollars to actually get some of the machines that they have out there. Machines that can actually create single-use items that we can use for import substitution and that we can also sell to the region for a load of different items. And we're not talking about machinery that's going to cost $1 million or 500,000 US dollars or even 250,000 US dollars, which means that the cost of machinery is actually very competitive. And when you go to things like the Canton Fair and you go to some of these other fairs and you look at how many people are building machinery and how competitive each industry is, paper, garment, food packaging, all these things, you realize how accessible it is. So one of the biggest barriers we have in Trinidad is that of land. Land is the greatest barrier in terms of its costs. So I've been working with some of the SMEs and we've been trying to figure out how we diversify. The actual getting the machinery is actually not a problem. Not a problem if you can go to the bank and you can get the US dollars. There used to be a grant for 30,000 US dollars, which was accessible, and you can get that to bring in machinery and so on. The banks are now saying, Republic is now saying they have a manufacturing loan in which they can support you. But one of the biggest problems is $7.5 million for $9 million for a warehousing space. $7.5 million for a warehousing space. A very tiny, less than a lot in Cunupia, 900,000 TT dollars. None of these spaces have 440 volts. None of these spaces have the electrical chaos necessary for machinery. All of these spaces are going to take additional investment to bring it up to scratch and secure the premises and so on. But we're already looking at $7 to $9 million just to get in the door. And when you go to places like Medellin, and when you go to places like China in particular, right? One of the amazing things is that the government has made it a policy to provide affordable spaces for business sectors to expand into and to grow. And that is why when you go to China, you realize that every different city produces a different thing. You go to one place in China and everyone there manufactures toys. You go to another place in China, everybody there manufactures some stone item. Another place does socks. Another place does garment manufacturing. Another place like Shenzhen does more technical aspects. And so, the reason why is that the government then says, well, this entire area, we're setting up for this particular purpose, and then we're making it affordable, but it's also about urban development at the same time. And Medellin is doing the same thing, which is why I said to you, I'm being driven into a place that looks like Laventille. I don't mean anything by that. What I mean is that an area that is not well built up and looks very humble. And yet in the middle of that, there are all these manufacturing centers set up for garment manufacturing. You go to the area where the airport is, and surrounding that area, the newest development was the government told people that manufacturers, if you want to set up here, we're giving you a tax break for X amount of years, and the land again is very, very cheap to do so. The only thing we had going for us was the e-tech parks. I have been dealing with the e-tech parks, and despite the people being quite nice, I would say, it has been exceedingly difficult, exceedingly difficult. First of all, the rent keeps changing. The last finance minister, his last move in December of 2024 was to raise the rent or destroy the concessionary rent and raise it to $36,000. I don't understand how you're expecting SMEs to diversify and start up and pay a rental of $36,000. Why not scale the rental over a period of 5 years, right? The second thing is there's no space. The spaces that are available, the parks themselves are getting pretty run down. A lot of the parks were built in areas that, as Ramesh had previously said in the beginning, crime affects these areas, and people don't want to set up there because already the criminal element has been in there and is destroying the buildings and stealing things from the building, like electrical and whatever, and that sort of thing. So there isn't full subscription there. They can't get people to get in there. The premise was sound in the sense that they were doing it in less, how should I say, less developed areas or less commercially developed areas, and you hope that employment would come from around the area. But the problem is crime stepped into those areas and so has made the areas where, commerce can't really happen. And that's something that the government seriously needs to deal with. When you look at developing countries, manufacturing countries that have really decided to go down a manufacturing road, right? Whether it is Mexico, whether it is India, whether it is China, whether it is Medellin, the government input has always been to remove the barriers to setting up manufacturing, remove the barriers to entry. And one of the key things is when you look at the factors of production, land is one of the key things. We can't really do anything about labor because the issue in Trinidad and Tobago is labor continues to go up, the price of labor, right? If the price of every single factor of production remains very high, then we lose whatever competitive advantage we have. And I know the holy grail scenario is that, oh, well, we're going to produce something that is, high valued and so on, and we're going to get a high price with it on an international market. And that's great. I mean, I hope we can get there sometime. But in the meantime, I agree with Ramesh and I agree with what Ms. Guardian was saying, which is we really need to get people as fast as possible to diversify. But that speed of diversification is slowed, A, by bureaucracy, by the ease of doing business, and 2, by some of the high barriers to entry, the major one, which is the cost of land. And unless those things are urgently addressed and addressed quickly, I don't see how, all this talking that we're doing and well-meaning. Ramesh has been doing this for a very long time. I understand through the past president, Kiran Maraj, Vashti was working with a lot of subcommittees and so on many different things. But I mean, if you're talking about very wealthy companies being able to diversify, then that's fine, they can do so. Because then the cost of something is not a barrier to them. If you're looking at the vast majority of SMEs that are in retail, that you would like to say should be earning some sort of export earnings and be earning their own US dollars to channel into their own companies and so on. and to assist in import substitution and to assist in the management of whatever scarce forex we have, which also has to be part of the entire forex problem. We can't simply say we're all for forex generation when we don't talk about how we're going to manage the limited or the scarce supply of forex we have available to us immediately. And the only way we're going to do that is A, through import substitution, B, possibly by import substitution to also say we're going to have some sort of negative or blacklist, which many people don't want to hear about. But depending on how dire the situation is, we don't have much else that we can actually do. So from my perspective, which is very granular, which comes from the trenches of people who are actually trying to say, retail in Trinidad and Tobago for SMEs have slowed down considerably. Over the last 10 years, the playing field has not been leveled. As a matter of fact, it has gone very much against that of SMEs. And larger companies are almost forming oligopolies and creating it's been very, very difficult. The way forward for SMEs is, again, to diversify into manufacturing, light manufacturing, processing, and there's a great will to do so. They are hindered by A, the flow of information, because the flow of information doesn't always trickle down to every single chamber. It is my belief that if a government has a plan, a strategic plan, and that strategic plan involves grants and that sort of thing, then it should be disseminated equally to everybody in the economy, right? And I have found, unfortunately, over the last 10 years that has not been the case. Some chambers get the information, other chambers don't, and then when we write or other chambers write, we don't get anything in return. Say, well, how can this help you? Special economic zones is one of those things. How is that special economic zones going to help SMEs? And then when I dug into it, and I started to ask the questions, and I went into the people who are actually involved in the special economic zones, I was told, well, we have certain ceilings, and you have to start up with X million, and nothing is going to be ready now, and check us in a year, and that kind of thing. So it is all well and good for us to have the conversations about diversification and manufacturing and export. The thing is, it needs to be executed, and it needs to be executed as fast a time frame as possible. Economies, unfortunately, sometimes go on 5-year cycles, and they go on 5-year cycles because they have a government for 5 years. We were lucky because we had a government for 10 years, but that, not a lot happened during those 10 years. It did for larger companies who had deeper pockets, who were able to, capitalize on the manufacturing. People like Ramesh at the TTMA did a considerable and incredible job going out there, doing all these foreign trips to enter, to get people to meet in foreign markets and so on. Same thing for Export TT, same thing for Invest TT in the beginning, before they started to be dismantled. TT Chamber working on some exciting things as well too. But the reality is, we're not talking about getting 10% of the people to diversify. We need everybody as much as possible to diversify. We need as broad and wide a category to do so. And then there are all these people who are in a category where they need the financing, or at least they need somebody to address the barriers to entry, most of which, in this case, the high cost or that real estate bubble. So, I want to end there because I could go on, but I want to end there because, I'm worried. I'm very worried about the state of SMEs in this country going forward. We have a new government, but they have considerable challenges ahead of them. The fact is that we have another 5-year cycle, of new policies, another 5-year cycle of a new government. And the way forward would be, how fast can we get this diversification to move, and how fast can we get more people into manufacturing in Trinidad and Tobago? But for that, the environment for that to happen, I believe, needs direct government intervention in order to provide. And I know that this government is cash-strapped, the economy is cash-strapped as it is, both in US dollars, both in revenues and so on. And this government has come in and found, a significant amount of issues when it comes to even funding itself from, as they say, their cash flow from month to month has been difficult, during the last term. And now this government has to face that. So the challenges are there. But then the hope is there as well, too, because if we can do this, if we can find a way to actually get this thing to occur and start to get the execution to happen, there is a lot of change and positive change that can happen in the next 5 years. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Vivek. I think your presentation certainly complemented the two earlier ones. Certainly, you emphasized a number of areas there that many of us weren't thinking about. I think certainly as someone in the field, you tend to have an insight into certain areas that one doesn't ordinarily look at. So we have on the table here quite a number of issues that were raised. And I think we can see as well from the questions in the chat that there are lots of interesting questions raised. I think the way to probably start is to begin to deal with the questions that were raised in the chat. I took note of a number of things, and we can probably come back to them. But I think, first of all, Roger started us off by talking about the how do we diversify and minimize the error, and what is the methodology that we can adopt to do that? I think, if I'm correct, if I'm not clear, maybe Roger, you may want to clarify that question a bit. You're saying what is the methodology of diversification? A number of things raised here touched a bit on methodology, but maybe you may clarify that, and then we could try to answer the question.
No problem. Let me elaborate. So we speak about diversification all the time. We are trying to form FTAs and partial scope trade agreements with a number of different groups. But how do we know which sectors will give us the best probability of earning foreign exchange and success? And how do we know which country will give us the best probability of being a good trade partner in terms of what they want or what we export? How do we know?
Yeah.
Ramesh, is that clear?
Yeah, if I understand it, you're trying to say we need to do a feasibility of the products or the services in which we could compete, and we also need to identify the countries where we could export in order to focus a bit on how we diversify. So anyone could begin. I don't know, Ramesh, if you want to probably respond to that.
Peter, Roger asked the question and answered it for himself. You know, he asked the question, how do we diversify? He went into the fact about talking about complementarity studies and working with countries and trying to figure out where our products could best enter the market and be competitive. And listen, to be honest, we have a lot of studies. The CARICOM Secretary, Peter, you yourself was involved in a number of these studies with regards to the European Union and countries within the European Union. The Ministry of Trade would have some studies. The CARICOM Secretariat would have some studies. The OTN would have some studies. Now, having said all that, is it that what we did 5 years ago relevant to today? Maybe not. Maybe we need to continue to re-examine that whole process. And I know Roger has been doing a lot of work. But to me, we need to even go beyond that. I think the fundamental question is, if we diversifying, what is the objective? And to me, in my mind, the objective is to earn foreign exchange. We can't diversify and bring other more retail sectors. We can't diversify and invest our scarce resources into sectors that will put a drain on the foreign exchange that we already have in the country. What we need to do is use the limited oil and gas revenues that we have now and invest it, as Vivek is saying, in some of these parks. If I was the government, for example, and I had this discussion already in different fora, where I would create parks for the SMEs, build out shells, and provide it at
exactly. I agree 100% with you, Ramesh. 100%.
It's very economical. And what will happen in a situation like that is that the government will get their revenues through the taxation process, create incentives for manufacturers and the SMEs to want to go into the to manufacturing.
But Roger, if I could jump in,
Roger,
if I could jump in here.
Well, Roger, you.
Hello?
Yes, Roger, I think you wanted to quickly respond to that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Ramesh, where are these studies? Now, I am very familiar with the literature. And we have been
I'm not hearing you,
raising
Roger.
this thing
Yeah.
constantly in the public, constantly asking for a scientific approach. The only study I know, Ramesh, is the one that TTMA did in 2019 or 20 with the university. I am yet to see the Ministry of Trade take this type of approach to exactly what you say. I heard Vashti, but I
Good.
disagreed with Vashti. And I will get on to that later. I think Ramesh is correct when he says if we diversify, it must be in areas that earn foreign exchange. But I am yet to see these studies, Ramesh. I mean, maybe you, where you sit, you are more exposed and fair enough. But I think we need, as a matter of urgent national security, because a lack of foreign exchange is a part of a national security problem. I think as a matter of urgent national security, we need to address this gap in the foreign exchange situation. Thanks.
So if I could just jump in here.
Yeah, go ahead, Vashti.
So the Ministry of Trade, Investment and Tourism, now, well, back then it was MTI, they engage with the International Trade Center to produce a national trade strategy. The methodology is extremely good. The issue here, because Roger, I know that you have been doing some work in Curacao. It's the same team that led the national trade
Yeah, I'm not hearing
strategy.
you, Vashti. I'm not
It's,
hearing you.
are you all hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing
I'm
you,
hearing you.
Vashti. I'm hearing you.
Okay, it's the same team, Roger, that did the NTS for Curacao. But here's the problem. Here's the issue. We have engaged the
Yeah, I think
ITC.
we're missing, at least I'm not hearing.
We have engaged
Prof. Gonzalez, are you hearing me?
I'm hearing you, yes, but some Vashti's voice is coming and going. Go ahead, Vashti.
Okay, so we have engaged the ITC simply to produce the strategy, but Curacao and the other countries also ask them to develop an implementation plan for them, and that determines the success of their strategy. So this is what we have fallen apart with in terms of the implementation.
Okay, yeah.
But Roger,
we
if I could also
Yeah, go ahead.
respond, Professor. Roger, why I
Yeah,
understand
go
what
ahead.
you're saying. I understand what you're saying, right? And I also understand what Vashti is saying and Ramesh. But why are we reinventing the wheel in a sense, Roger, if before we can even look at what areas that we want to diversify into, the environment, the physical environment or the physical infrastructure for that diversification isn't there. It's not there, right? And then again,
We will
you
have
see
to change the wheels on the bus as we move.
what I also want to point out is you were talking about, there's a lot of disruption in the, political disruption is a thing. So our closest ally is America. America has this thing going with their tariffs, trade tariffs, and so on. That's creating a lot of this disruption, disrupting a lot of supply chains, creating a lot of havoc with things coming in from China and so on. And within this disruption, if we were at that space, we could have provided quite a lot of things, right? With that 10% tariff, they would have been levying upon us rather than on the 50% on China, the 25% or something like that, and cheaper shipping costs that we could send to them, and that would have been a huge number of disparate types of items and stuff that they would have bought in. Another thing that people don't understand about manufacturing is that when you're dealing with manufacturing as a buyer, it's all about very large MOQs and logistical supply, right? Supply chain, the shipping, all of which coming from the Far East now as an area of huge manufacturing. There's a lot of disruption in the supply chain and a lot of volatility in the prices. One of the issues, like people don't realize that many of the smaller islands like Grenada, islands like St. Lucia, many of the smaller islands don't directly buy from China because they can't make the MOQs that they're asking for simpler products. So they have to go elsewhere. So many of them go to the free trade zone in Panama, or they go to New York, or they go to if we could have manufactured those things, we could have sold it directly within the CARICOM region. So the idea is that you're looking for very high priced things, or you're saying that we really need to diversify into particular types of goods and this. So, and I completely understand that. But the other thing is we just need to get moving. But more importantly, we need to do the groundwork to provide the infrastructure. Nothing is moving and nothing can move if it is that there are no warehouses, or if it is that the only way forward to have manufacturing space, Roger, is to buy a green acre, which is a green plot of land, and then you start to build, which is 2 years. And then after you start to build, then you start to put in your machinery, then you start to make production or whatever. And by that time, year 5 reach already. New government might change, new policy, who knows? So, it's to me, it's boots on the ground, and let's start to work on the infrastructure, as Ramesh said, and that's the first important thing to do before we even reach the more technical aspects of, well, where do we diversify to and all that, because it all comes down to the start, and the start has to be where our industrial parks, where is the spare capacity in our, in this proposed new movement towards the diversification towards manufacturing. Where is that spare
Yeah.
capacity in a physical sense? It ain't there, Roger.
No,
Okay,
so,
well,
I mean, I would
let me,
like
let me, let me raise that question here.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. Okay.
Let me raise that. I know I've understood basically what you're trying to say, right? In terms of identifying areas where we have potential and going after them and identifying who's going to produce these things and so forth. But I'm wondering, for example, are business supposed to respond in a way in which they can identify what would work and what would not work? That is to say, as business people, is it not possible for you to see in what areas you can be competitive and where you can export to? I think when we say that we shouldn't pick winners, or government should not pick winners, we tend to be saying basically that it is the business people who should identify on the ground where they can export or where they cannot export. So I'm wondering if we are not seeing that. Or are they doing it and they're not being successful? I don't know. I'm not clear on this. But anyway, I mean, we can't spend all the time on this. We have a lot of other questions on the table here. Roger asked about services. I think, Vashti, you touched on some of this. You was asking about the hyper-rung services, but how, where, and why. I think we have some idea as to what services we can compete in. I think, years ago, I saw the government has been listing areas of services where we can compete. We keep talking about them. I see up to recently, they're still talking about the maritime services, tourism, educational services, medical services, and so forth, and so on. I don't know if there's a problem. I mean, but these are just general areas that we select. It is for the people on the ground, in a sense, to determine exactly where they want to run with these things. So I don't know if there's, Vashti, you have a response to this?
I have spent roughly 7 years, 6 years fully immersed into the services sector. And when we talk about the export of services, because I really try to get into the mindsets of these people, because we are getting some funding from Caribbean Export to do capacity building, a services go global training program. And when I am approaching them, because it's free and people do not want to take up this offer, I really had to understand why they didn't want to do this training. And first thing, most service providers do not see themselves as an exporter, because they feel that to be an exporter, you need to be a manufacturer. You must have a product, which led me into really understanding how they think. And this is something that we need to factor into a country strategy to drive the globalization of our firms. You have to impact on the exporter's mindset, what it takes to build a citizen, a company to make them export driven. And we are not addressing that. So what TTMA is doing is excellent in terms of the trade missions, but we need to have a much more structured country approach to drive exports. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, yeah, I certainly agree with that. From some work I did years ago, I came to realize what you have just said. Service providers do not usually see themselves as exporters. They see that as a kind of different world, and people doing pretty simple things like people in midwifery or something like that. They do not see themselves as being able to get out there and go and sell their services to rich people who buy these kinds of services and so on. And the problem seems to be, how do you get them to see themselves as exporting their services, and how do you get them to understand that they have to be competitive so they would adjust their prices and so forth? So certainly I would agree with that. But let's see, we have a number of other questions here. We have the question of tourism. Roger, I think you raised this question about tourism seems to be have the biggest chance. How do we get these numbers out? We are late starting tourism, and we all know why. Our history never, in a sense, pushed us in that direction because of oil and gas. I have been talking about tourism since the 70s, and I came to understand it was useless to talk about it because there was very much opposition to tourism. We saw it as something as a servitude. I think from your time of Dr. Williams and so forth, that attitude was there. And we only began to turn to it a bit in the 80s with the cruise tourism and so forth. I think we're now beginning to see, well, look, we have tremendous potential to be a tourism destination. I mean, you just look at, I traveled throughout the region and to other places, and I tend to believe that Trinidad has tremendous potential in tourism in terms of all the various aspects of tourism that we could offer: ecotourism, cultural tourism, cuisine, the beaches, the forests, and the birds, and all of that. There's tremendous things here to offer. But I'm not clear in my mind. I think we had a discussion on this to some extent earlier, and we had Dr. Akola from campus there. She's a specialist on tourism, and she gave some insights as to why this is so. It's baffling to me, for example, that we haven't gone further. I'm beginning to see more and more people becoming tour operators, and they're taking people out to waterfalls and stuff like that, and the rivers, and we're in a way trying to mobilize more people to become tourists. That is the local tourists, but it's reaching over to the foreigners as well. So I'm wondering here, what you say? How can we increase the numbers? Where do we start? It seems to me that we are starting somewhere. I think we are pushing the tourism promotion agency to do a lot more. I see them a lot more out there trying to advertise more. We're spending a little more on advertising. I'm sure also Tobago is spending a lot more. The Tobago tourism unit is spending a lot more on promoting Tobago and so on. I don't know what the response is. We're trying to get more airlines to come to the country, and you begin to see one or two more coming in here. I think the Dutch airlines have come in. I see now where this one from Germany is going to be coming back to Tobago and so forth. So I don't know, Roger, if you were thinking specifically of something, and you had something in mind as to where we could start to increase these numbers. I think a lot of that thing has to do with advertising and promoting the sites and getting to operators to take an interest in you. I tend to see tourism largely, as I study the rest of the region, I tend to see tourism as being very tied up in the hotels and the tour operators and the airlines. It's a vertical kind of integration. And the three of them operate in a very, very coordinated way. So that you would find that if the Spanish hotel operators go to Jamaica, they would be followed by tour operators in Spain who would be with them, and the airlines who are very much involved in that, because they all see a possibilities of making money from more tourists by sending more tourists to these places. But I'm not sure what is our approach here. How do we see it? And I think certainly we have to build more hotels because we don't have enough hotel space. I mean, if you take both islands.
Well, Professor, I wanted it would be good to raise this in this forum because we have some intellectuals here and so on. Ramesh was speaking about, or there was this conversation earlier about diversifying into areas that could generate forex. But we're talking about generating forex for ourselves, right? So when we
Yeah.
talk about hotels in Tobago, where do we stand really with Sandals or foreign large companies building hotels in Tobago? Because how much of that actual forex comes to us? So is it a good thing, or is it better if we build the hotels in Tobago? That was something I was actually wondering about, and I was if we could put it to some of the panelists in a sense, because that is becoming a bit of a hot topic in Tobago
Well,
now in
let
terms
me
of
let me let me
sandals
say,
and whatever.
well, you have to make a choice. You have to determine if you're going to make more money by going with the foreign hotel owners, the foreign investors, the owners of Sandals and these things, who would come together, as we saw, as you see, for example, in St. Vincent. Sandals have gone in there and they have together. You have more airlines are coming there. They are bringing more tourists. Sandals is making money. And as Sandals Hotel does well, he employs more local people. They also buy more from the local economy and so forth. So there's that multiplier effect. And as a result, and they pay taxes and all of that. As a result of that, the economy makes money. So that you can do quite well by having the foreign investors come into the tourism industry. And this is what we see largely throughout the Caribbean, right up. Jamaica is full of that. And it's a one way of trying to develop the tourism. Some people talk about boutique tourism and having the tourists smaller hotels and we owning the hotels and therefore we make more money. That is true to some extent, but I think that can go along with also to large scale hotel investors who are bringing a lot more tourists here, have a lot more airlines coming in and people spending more money in the economy. But I don't know what others think about it. I don't know, Vashti or Ramesh, if you all have given some thought to this question of how do we go forward on tourism in terms of expanding the numbers.
So, first to begin with, we do not have a current tourism master plan. And we need to, for each product, for instance, we have to decide what we're going after. If it is sport tourism, if it is medical tourism, if it is yacht tourism, and then have a specific strategy for each subsector within tourism that we're going after. We don't have that. We need to look at the infrastructure. So going back to the original, what I started talking about, we look at the areas that could generate the most for our country at this point in time, which is the yachties are long-term tourists. Let's look at that. Let's look at sports. Currently, I am chairing a committee on sport tourism. And when we talk about sports tourism, we're looking at that whole Cuba, Talparo region to see whereby we're using the facilities within the region to build up the businesses in the region. Because if we look at where those facilities are located in Cuba, it's basically micro and small businesses. So if we have a strategy to drive eco and sport tourism, it's to enhance the businesses in the area to make sure that the hotels are green, because the eco tourist is very conscious about what they eat, what they drink. So it's that type of strategy that we need. It means the greening of the businesses in the area, and there's funding, there's grant funding from the EU if you green your businesses.
Yeah. Right, very interesting. Certainly, yes, I agree with the idea of being sector specific and focusing on particular areas where you could do some kind of master plan and try to promote development in a much more cohesive way. My impression, I agree with you basically, because we tend to be going across the board right now, in a broad sort of way, and we're not really touching these specific sectors. Okay, any further comments on this? Anyone wanted to say anything about tourism? If not, we can move on to look at the next question. Roger talk about selecting our trade partners. I think, Ramesh, you had spoken a bit about for missions, going on trade missions. I think, to me, it's quite clear how you do that. I think more or less you would have looked at what is the trade with these countries, or what is the potential for them to import from us, and you would then determine the trade mission. I think your members themselves would also see some sort of wisdom of going there. They would believe that they can sell there. But maybe you may want to tell us a little more on this, yeah.
No, you hit
Yeah,
the nail on
Ramesh?
the head, Peter. I mean, that is the kind of analysis that we will do. We hire consultants on the ground in all the countries that we go into to do the market analysis for us. You know, we work with the missions where there are missions. We work with the commercial attaches. The government, the last regime had identified commercial attaches for placement in Jamaica, Panama to service that part of the world. One in North America, one in Europe, and one in Suriname, Guyana. And those trade missions would have done a lot of the work for us in terms of complementarity, in terms of what we export, what is the competition on the market is like. But generally, Peter, you know, it's best to trade with your friends. Let's start with that. You know, that was the old adage of the CARICOM Secretariat: trade with your friends, trade within the CARICOM, trade where you have preferential markets. You know, and we do have two preferential markets still, which is North America and which is Canada. Well, we don't know how much United States is still a preferential market with this global tax of 10%. But, you know, that is an interesting thing because a lot of people see that as a negative. But let me say, the global tax means everybody's paying the 10% going into to United States. But he also charge a higher tax to Canada. Even today, he said he's going to increase the tax into Canada. So what it means, what is the real impact on that is that our manufacturers would be able to go in there at a better rate relative to our competitors selling into United States specifically. Well, initially he had said Guyana would pay 40-something%, Mexico, Canada, China. Our real competition will come from indigenous manufacturing in America. But how much of our manufacturing face competition? The products that we sell in is not really competing with indigenous manufacturing. Coming back to the original question of who we trade with and why we trade with.
Yeah, Ramesh, yeah.
You know, it's our partners, it's the preferential arrangement, it's the partial scope. The question then becomes, who do we sign these agreements with? You know, we have, for the longest while, we've been talking about South-South trade. We do have some partial scope agreement. We do have a free trade agreement with Costa Rica. We have a partial scope with Colombia, one with Venezuela. We recently signed one with Chile. We're talking about Curacao. We're talking about some of these countries. But a number of factors stymie the growth of the trade with these countries. And one of the major things is the shipping lines. So those things, there's always an argument. If the trade is there, the shipping line will come. And then the traders will say, well, if these shipping lines are there, then we will trade. It's a chicken and egg scenario. But to me, really and truly, a lot of our manufacturers are comfortable being small fish in small ponds. You know, a medium-sized fish in a small pond. You know, we comfortable, we make some money, we do relatively well within the Caribbean, and between 20 and 40 them push the envelope to trade beyond the Caribbean market. We need to develop a whole entrepreneurship class that are risk takers, ready to push the envelope. So we have to redefine what this whole educational process about entrepreneurship is about. How you grow your operations, how you move and morph from being a small, micro, successful operator to being a medium size and then a large one. We need to instill that type of discipline, that type of education. So to me, it takes a whole holistic approach.
Yes.
But Peter, I want to say one thing. Go ahead, sorry, Peter. Go ahead, you go ahead. Go ahead, Peter, sorry.
No, I wasn't hearing you, so I was just but you could continue. You wanted to finish on that comment.
Well, what I want to add is that a lot of people think that we have exhausted the CARICOM market. There's still many opportunities within the Caribbean market. To me, I think we need to look within our own economic zone, our own Caribbean region, because if you look at the 7 million English-speaking Caribbean people, we look at the Dominican Republic, which is
I agree with that too, Ramesh.
We look at Cuba, which is another 10 to 11 million. We look at Haiti, which is another 10 million. We look at Puerto Rico, which is 4 to 5 million. We
Dominican Republic.
Guatemala, Guadeloupe, Martinique, French Guiana. All of a sudden, If we get this thing working right within our own economic space, and I'm calling the Caribbean, not CARICOM, Caribbean as our economic space, the St. Croix, St. Thomas, all these different little St. Barb's and all these different countries, the Curacao, the ABC countries. You're talking about a population about 50 million people. All of a sudden, that brings economies of scope into play. I mean, economies of scale into play. And that will allow us to bring down our cost of production and be competitive in the extra regional markets. The Europe Economic Partnership Agreement that we have with them, the North America, the Asian, all these different countries. So to me, we need to push the envelope with regards to our own economic space. Those are the countries I think we could really and truly make a significant dent in terms of export potential. The South American markets continue to be an attractive one as well, but the challenge with those remains the shipping line. But we've seen a lot of developments taking place. We see there's a shipping line now that is moving from Curacao, the ABC countries, into Trinidad and Tobago, cutting that trading time from a couple of weeks to 3 days. And I've been having talk with them, and it has been working well, and they want to expand it and move to different countries. So a lot of things are taking place, a lot of opportunities are there, but we need the complementarity. We need more market research. We need more intelligence. That commercial attaché placement did a lot of good work for us. Working with the embassies and the missions are important as well. Doing the workings with those entities, but we need more than trade mission. Embassies and missions that are seeking to knock glasses and deal with wars and those things. We need commercial presence in these missions that working optimally, that seeking the interest and getting market intelligence and doing that groundwork for the manufacturers that seeking to penetrate markets. I can give you a practical example. I had a manufacturer wanted to get data from a company in London. And this manufacturer had significant interest in getting his product into the supermarket shelves in London. And I had called the embassy there a couple of years ago. And the embassy people tell me, that is not their responsibility to get that kind of data. And that was very, very disheartening. So coming back to Vivek's point, what small manufacturer could pay Merrill Lynch, for example, to get that market intelligence for them? It's starting at 10,000, 20,000 pounds to do that kind of research for you.
Yeah, right.
That's why I agree with him when he said that the government needs to play a greater role to help the SMEs as well. And these are some of the things that we want government to get involved in. Not so much about all the niceties and things, but be a facilitator for the SMEs. Be a facilitator for manufacturing. And I think if we could start with that mindset, we have great opportunities outside there, because we continue to produce really good, high quality standard of goods and services in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah. Good, thanks a lot. Yeah, well, I think we've answered some of the other questions. Why are partial scopes not working? And why are trade agreements also not working? From my understanding, the trade agreements just basically deal with tariffs and some of the non-tariffs. There are lots of other issues that are involved in penetrating our country, and which the trade agreements don't get involved in. And it's only when you begin to actually try to go in the country that you discover a lot of them. And you have to have very good people within the country who are helping you to get in the country. So you have to have good agents there who are working to promote your product and so forth. So the trade agreements is just part of the way. It's very helpful. It's a good first start, but there are lots of other things that go along with trade agreements. I don't fully understand why the trade agreements are not working. We have some explanations. Ramesh talked about the shipping arrangements sometimes don't work with them and so forth.
Peter, can I add, Peter? Peter, can I add one point here? Trade agreements is all about market access, but market access is not access to market, because you hit the nail on the head. There were a number of these trade agreements that we signed where we get market access and the government come and say, I've negotiated this trade agreement, I've removed tariffs, go on trade. But when you try to trade, the distributorship law, the registration law, the non-tariff barriers, the labeling requirements, the front of pack labeling issues, all these things come into play. And that is really and truly, when we're doing this negotiation, especially country to country negotiation, we need skilled negotiators to go involved and to be part of the negotiating process, to remove not just the tariffs at the border, but the non-tariff issues as well. Because you know, Peter, better than me, that Costa Rica and DR with the distributorship law, these things create significant problems for manufacturers trying to trade into these countries for quite some time. There are no tariffs there. So there's market access theoretically, but when you try to get your goods into these markets, the non-tariff barriers are sometimes Herculean to overcome. They're far greater than the tariffs.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Certainly correct. I would say also too that some of these countries, I've noticed in the case of the Dominican Republic, the private sector is very much involved in exporting. So that when the private sector, when the country starts to negotiate a trade agreement, the private sector comes and they're very specific about what they want in that agreement. For instance, when they were negotiating with the European Union, the private sector came and began to identify a number of things, all in the rules of origin, for example, which are probably the most important thing, probably more important than tariffs. They begin to identify the kind of value added they would need. But what they had targeted was investors coming out of Europe and coming to the Dominican Republic to invest in the clothing industry and exporting back to Europe. So they were looking for an agreement which would contain things that would facilitate these exporters coming from Europe. You see, so they're very clear of what they were about. My impression, on the other hand, was in Caribbean private sector people, they weren't keen about it, much of it. They weren't very interested. They had no clear ideas of what they wanted. You try consulting them, but you would get some very general and some very vague ideas and so on. So that you need to have an export-oriented private sector that know precisely what they want, and they go and push these things in the agreement so they can get them. But we have to try to come there at some stage when the private sector gets more involved in exporting and begin to see things. But a lot of the things that you raise here, Ramesh, are very important in terms of exporting, and I think we need to probably look at that at some point in time. Well, we have a couple other questions before we wrap up. I think it's 8:21 already. We have, this question about CARICOM. How do we deepen intra-CARICOM trade? I think Ramesh touched on some of this and some of the issues involved in CARICOM. I don't know if there's much we want to add on that. There are lots of issues involved in CARICOM. It's not something that we could solve overnight. A lot of the countries in CARICOM do not feel they benefit from it, as we see currently in the discussion in the OECS, where some of them are talking about wanting to get rid of the CSME or leave CARICOM and so forth. We have issues among ourselves that are not easy to resolve. We cling a lot to sovereignty, and some of us think that, we don't manufacture anything, so therefore we don't need the CSME, and they tend to feel that they could do better outside and so on. So there's a lot of work still to be done to really deepen CARICOM. I don't think it's an easy task. We haven't as yet been able to reach to a CARICOM commission where we, like the European Union, or where we could agree to agreements that are accepted by all at the heads of government, like the European Union. We are still very far from that. Each agreement that they come to at the heads of government has to go back to the member state to be approved. So it's not really an agreement, because at the member states, someone was giving me an idea of the amount of agreements that are still blocked at the member states. They agree at the level of CARICOM in Georgetown, but the member states still have to agree on them. So it shows you how far we are in terms of integration. In the European Union, when you agree at the level of Brussels, the law is accepted by all 28 members. So there's no haggling again about it. In CARICOM, you agree on something, but you still have to go and haggle in the member state as to whether that could pass the parliament in the specific country. So there are lots of issues that we have to deal with in terms of CARICOM as we go forward. I think it will take us quite a while to do that, given what is separating us. And finally, we have the special economic zones assist with this. I think, Ramesh, you raised some points. I think you, Vivek, you raised some points about the special economic zone, how difficult it still is to get into that. And it is very costly. And a lot of issues are raised which don't really facilitate that. So those special economic zones are not really working as they tend to suggest that they would. So basically, I think these are some of the things that we have faced. Let me see, we still have a couple of questions. I don't know if we're able to finish all of them. A lot of them go pretty far down the list. We just have a little bit of time. I don't know if any panelists see a question that they would like to reply to insofar as it concerns what they said. If so, let me know. If you think that is a specific issue there that you want to reply to.
Peter,
very
there's an interesting question here that is probably close to everyone here, that posed by David Basil about reforming the Foreign Exchange Act to make it more facilitating, and it could serve as an enabler to get make people bring back more foreign exchange into the country. I think he's onto something here. I think it's important for us to revisit the foreign exchange. To me, one of the things that we need to do in Trinidad and Tobago is restore confidence in our foreign exchange framework. You know, I know Roger might want to add something to this, but I really think that we need to create instruments that make it attractive to allow people to bring their foreign exchange back into Trinidad.
Yes, I'm not hearing.
Peter, I think the challenge coming from your end with the internet, you know, than relative to others.
Yeah, well, I'm not clear, you know, there's quite a number of questions that are still outside there that we haven't reached. And I'm just trying to see basically how we can still accommodate a few of them. We cannot probably answer all of them here tonight. There are lots of interesting questions, but I don't know if you could provide. I usually try to, you know, answer all the questions, but I'm seeing our time is running out on us. And this is why I've said if there are panelists that see questions here that they think they need to reply to, maybe they could just quickly intervene and respond to them. The foreign exchange question, as we discussed this at some length before and so on, this foreign exchange issue. There are lots of issues here that are involved. And how do you go about making people feel comfortable in bringing back the foreign exchange and holding the foreign exchange in the country and stuff like that. There's some ideas that are here that are worth noting. I think we're beginning to see some attempts to try to deal with that in terms of facilitating their being able to, they have to be guaranteed the access to that foreign exchange when they need it, or if they need to take it back out of the country and so forth. That's the only way they would certainly hold it here. So I think some arrangement has to be made like that. I mean, normally we think, I remember since years ago when we talked about in 1993 about going to the floating exchange and freeing up the foreign exchange market. The whole idea was to try to get the business people to gain confidence in the exchange rate system. If it is free exchange rate system, they would hold the foreign exchange here and they would get access to the foreign exchange whenever they wanted. They can bring it in and take it out whenever they want. And the idea is that if there's that access, the tendency would them to hold more of the foreign exchange in the country than they did at the time. I think and that worked to some extent until afterwards we moved away from the floating exchange rate. We moved off of that somewhere afterwards as we began to get an overvalued currency and stuff like that, and we ended up where we are today. But let me say that we'll have to come back to these issues at some later point. Maybe we could have another session and we can discuss some of them again. But I will take another look at them and maybe in next month or sometime we'll discuss. Roger will talk about this and see if we could come back to them. Let me just ask each panelist to make a few closing remarks as we wind down. I don't know if you just want in a few minutes to just say a few things that you probably didn't cover and which you wish to say before we close. I don't know, Ramesh?
Yeah, sure. I could start. Yeah. I think that, you know, we still have a lot of potential here in Trinidad. I don't see it as doom and gloom. I think we have a lot of capabilities. I think if we get our acts right, if we do some of the fundamentals right, if we work towards creating that enabling environment to foster the growth of the SME sector that drives the economy, some of the things that Vivek spoke to. I think if the diversification is meaningful to include the tourism and the services sector, I think Trinidad and Tobago still has a lot to offer. And there are difficult periods ahead, and there will be challenges, but I think we have enough capabilities. We might need a little more political will to move some things along, but I think we have enough capabilities to rise above the challenges and be the champion country within the Caribbean region. I firmly believe that.
Thanks again, Ramesh. Vashti, you have some concluding remarks?
Yes, Prof. I will start where I will close where I started. I think it is critical for us to move beyond the talk into action. Time is of the essence. We have had enough studies done. What we need to do is to move into robust implementation. And when I speak about implementation, I speak specifically about moving to prioritizing key areas of focus, putting deliverables and timelines to that. And it has to be a whole of government and private sector approach. We have to collaborate as we have never done before. And that's where I will close.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much, Vashti. Yeah, Vivek, you have.
I'd like to say I agree 100% with the with what Vashti and Ramesh have said. I would also like to add that you know what they're the unsung heroes in this thing, which are also some of they're the unsung heroes in this thing, which are also some of the institutions that have helped a lot of manufacturers, a lot of people to begin their journey into manufacturing, or let's say export-oriented activity. And that's people like Invest TT and Export TT in particular. And I think that I would hope that this government would spend some time and really create more institutions and empower more institutions like these, because I think that they're necessary to assist in that this drive that we really want to have towards diversification into manufacturing or tourism or anything like that. And I think it's a great place to staff young people, because Export TT was full of young, bright people and so on. And I think that I would really hope that they'd continue in that vein to create more institutions like that.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Let me first of all thank all the panelists. I think they've all made very excellent contributions, and we have had a very useful exchange. I think this, in a sense, judging from all the questions that were raised, I think this to some extent will warrant some kind of second session. We certainly got a very good response, and I also wish to thank the participants for all the questions they asked. I think they definitely were involved in the discussion, and this is what we wanted to see. Let me also thank the organizers, in particular, Prof. Hossain, Dr. Rebecca Gookool-Bosland, Mr. Mark Rupchan, and the others for putting this together. And let's hope that we come back to some of these questions and further the discussion on this matter. Thank you all, and have a very pleasant evening. Good night.